the world is going to put you in a box, don't do it to yourself as well. Don't put yourself in a box when there's going to be so many outside forces that are going to be happy to do it for you.
I study the patterns of the universe.
Answers to the brain.
Virtual your mind. Talking about your life. Fundamental principles.
Philosophy.
What is and what is not true.
Those who know themselves.
Being better every single day.
Good day, folks. Welcome back to the Think Grow podcast. This is your host, Ruben Chavez. Today, I'm speaking with Alex Starr, who is a wildland firefighter, former wildland firefighter, and the author of the new book, Rewrite the Rules, an unconventional way to build an intentional life, which I really loved. Great book. Alex is a good friend. We've known each other since 2017, I think, so about 4 years or so. I was on his podcast back then, and since then, we've just cultivated a friendship. He's introduced me to several other people who have actually been guests on this podcast. So it's been great. And I wanted to have Alex on the show to talk about his new book. We also catch up a little bit, but mainly we talk about the book and some of the background that serves as context for the book, his experience as a wildland firefighter and his misadventures and adventures and the lessons that he learned through following that path. We talk about the value of questioning assumptions and beliefs, and also about the balance between holding beliefs and updating our belief systems. We also talk about building resilience and psychological flexibility and how to go about that and what Alex does to cultivate those traits. Alex is a pleasure to talk to. He's really fun and engaging. And I think one of the interesting things about him is that I think without trying, he actually embodies a lot of the ideas that I've been discussing on this podcast as of late in terms of the various and conflicting needs that we have and the values that exist within us that we're always trying to balance. You know, he really embodies many of these conflicting values and balances them in very interesting ways. And that makes him a very interesting person, I think. I mean, one of the things that strikes me is that he endorses living an unconventional life and kind of breaking free from the molds of the mold that society has made for you in some sense. But I think you'll find in this conversation, he's quite a practical and pragmatic guy, a very down-to-earth person. And that's a very, I would say, rare combination of traits to have. And so anyway, that's part of what makes Alex unique and part of what makes him so interesting to talk to. I think this is a really great discussion that you guys will find value in. So here is Alex Starr. Alex Starr, what's up, man? How you doing?
Glad to be here, dude. It's always fun doing podcasts with like friends of yours, you know, that you don't have to kind of like try and build a relationship over Zoom right before you jump into a heady conversation.
Totally. Well, it's like performs double duty because we get to catch up and we get to talk about like real things. And then also people get to listen in on that. So that's a useful dynamic.
100%, man.
So you wrote a book and you beat me. You started, I think, after I started, and you finished before I have even finished. So that's cool. But I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to get into it, but I also wanted to kind of, just as a refresher for myself, and also obviously for context for this conversation, if you could just kind of go through your entire life since birth. No, I'm just kidding. If you could just give us some background as to give us some context, man, like give us some background about what you're about and about kind of the events that led to the book.
Yeah. In a nutshell, you know, I was 8 pounds, 10 ounces. And, so I mean, really what happened, man, was I went through high school, you know, and as I ended high school, I was told that the next logical step was to go to college, of course, you know, and that's just what you did after high school. So I went to college. Like most people, loved learning, right? But really had a strong opposition to school and the way that school is set up nowadays, just through memorization. There's not a whole lot of critical thinking. It really stamped out a lot of my creativity in a lot of ways. So, of course, why not pay $50,000 to go continue that for 4 years when you're 18 and not sure what you want to do with your life? That sounds awesome. And I sound ungrateful, and I'm not. But, you know, I went through college, and by the end of college, I really wasn't in a good place at all. I was using alcohol a lot. I was using girls. I was using all these different ways of escaping because I had no clue who I was or what I wanted to do, because I really was just following the path that was laid out for me and kind of following the script, I would say. It was towards the end of my 5th year of college, because I couldn't do it in 4, that I just, everybody was asking me what I should do or what I was going to do after college. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. All I knew was what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to just jump into a job when I felt like I had a lot to give back to the world, even though that sounds kind of cheesy. I felt like I was young and capable, and I wanted to see what else was out there. I wanted to test myself. I wanted to go see the world and give back and live a little before I jumped into working at Enterprise for 40 hours a week or whatever it would be. And that's when my dad, bless his heart, mentioned AmeriCorps to me. And for anyone who doesn't know, AmeriCorps is a domestic Peace Corps. So you spend a year traveling around the country in a group of 10. Like, we worked at a homeless shelter, living in the basement of a church for a few months. Worked on a ranch outside of San Antonio. And that changed the entire trajectory of my life, was joining AmeriCorps.
Your dad suggested it?
Yeah. My dad suggested it. He first suggested Peace Corps, and then I remember he sent me a link one afternoon saying, "Hey, I heard about AmeriCorps. You should check it out." And it was perfect. It was domestic. I didn't have to do a 2-year commitment. It was just a year. It was domestic. I applied and got stationed in Denver for it. And yeah, I mean, that changed the entire trajectory of my life, man. That opened me up to so many new concepts, so many new people. That's what started it all. And through that is where I actually got my wildland firefighting training. I had no idea what wildland firefighting was. No idea.
Is that voluntary completely, or do you get some compensation? Like, how does that work exactly?
You get a stipend of like $300 a month, I believe, something like that. So it's not technically volunteer, but you're really not being paid either, you know?
Right. And obviously you get room and board.
Yeah, man. I mean, I was 23, so you get room and board, and you get $300, basically beer money at that point, because all your room and board is covered and you're 23, and they defer your student loans in the process, which I had. And then they actually paid off, I believe they gave you $5,000 towards your student loans when you finished.
Got it. And then in exchange, you are being a community servant of sorts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like I said, it's 4 projects. Each one's about 2 to 3 months, and they choose those for you. You're in the same team of 10, and yeah, you travel around the western side of the United States for this one to different assignments. So some people would go and work at a Habitat Humanity project. I worked at like a food bank for 2 months. I worked, like I said, on like a ranch, kind of like a public use area to kind of help rebuild the trails. People did a ton of different things.
Very cool. That's awesome. And so from there, because the next kind of stage in your life was you became a wildland firefighter. So how did that transition take place?
Through AmeriCorps, they had a distinct wildland firefighting team. So for those 4 projects that I mentioned, if you tried out for this wildland firefighting team and got on, then 2 of those would be doing wildland firefighting training instead of going to Habitat for Humanity or doing those things. And it was through the Forest Service, the U.S. Forest Service. So it was like 100%, you're on a 10-person crew now for those kind of 2 projects. I tried out. I was doing push-ups in my room for like the month beforehand, nonstop, because one of the things they tested you on was push-ups. I'm not that strong of a runner, so I just was like, I'm going to crush the shit out of these push-ups. I think I did like 120 in like a minute and a half or something.
Oh, nice. When we get off the phone, I'm going to try to do that.
Yeah, there's no way I could do it now. I told my fiance Ashley how many I used to be able to do the other day though, and she was impressed. So that was cool. Yeah, and so really that's what sparked it. And I just thought, man, how cool is that? Firefighting, but you're in the forest? Can it get any cooler than that? You get to be outdoors while doing this badass shit. And they're still kind of paying me a little bit. I couldn't think of anything better to do.
Nice. How long did you do that for?
So after AmeriCorps ends, right now I'm sitting there and I have all this training to be a wildland firefighter. When we did those projects in AmeriCorps, I was in Colorado in 2 feet of snow, doing firefighting assignments, hiking up huge mountains to fires. We were our own little crew, but we just weren't like paid through the Forest Service, right? So I got out. So now I'm 24 years old. I moved back home with my parents and I get a job at a storage unit, literally just like picking up people's shit in the storage unit that were using it as a place to live. So like I'm talking like human shit in the storage unit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because these kind of homeless people would rent a unit for $100 a month and then try and live in it. It's actually a good idea if you're homeless. It was kind of a good move, I thought.
Smart.
If you didn't have much money. I had this amazing experience in America. And now I'm back home with my parents. I'm picking up people's shit in this storage unit job with a college degree, making $10 an hour or whatever. My only goal at that point was to get on a real U.S. Forest Service wildland firefighting crew. And the way that works is it's 6 months on, 6 months off. So I got home like in October and I was like, I'm going to be hired on a crew starting in April. I'm not going to be here longer than 6 months, because what better way at 24 than to have 6 months on a job where you get to fly around in helicopters and travel and be outside lighting fires. And then you have 6 months off where you don't have to do anything. It was a dream come true. So that's what I set all my sights on to make happen. And then I did that. I alternated that for the next three seasons down in Southern Arizona near you.
Yeah, I remember. So you did the wildland firefighting, and at what point did you realize, like, hey, maybe I have something to say, maybe, I have something to contribute in the form of a book. You also started a podcast in between that time. So how did those projects kind of arise from your experiences thus far?
So there's a guy named Booster and a guy named Kyle on my wildland firefighting crew. Kyle was an accountant, and I mentioned him in the book. He was an accountant. He got his MBA. His parents paid for it. And he was miserable at his job as an accountant. He absolutely hated it. He was just drinking himself silly, depressed, all the above, all that we all hear about. He had one of those moments, man. He had one of those epiphanies where he just was staring at his computer one day and realized that he didn't have to do that anymore if he decided not to. And he started the process then and there of becoming a firefighter, which is his dream. It was always his dream to do that. And made it happen. And then here he and I were, and it was his first season on the crew. And he was a couple years older than me. He was maybe 26 or 27 at the time. And then I had another friend on the crew named Booster. Booster grew up on the border there of Mexico in Nogales. He's about 6'2". He's got tattoos all over. He is one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet in your life. He's got a family of 4. But when he grew up, he was involved heavily in gang activity on the border. He was moving a lot of drugs across the border. He was getting in a lot of fights. He got expelled from almost every school that he was in. And he had a really, really rough upbringing. Dad wasn't around. He went through the religious route to kind of find his enlightenment, or for him to reach that moment. Completely turned his life around. And now is an extremely dedicated father, like the nicest person you'll ever meet. And obviously you're on this crew where you're living and eating and working with these guys 80, 100 hours a week for 6 months straight. You have so many conversations with them and you really get to know these guys. And it was Booster and Kyle's stories that just triggered something in my mind where I realized that other people need to hear these and other people could benefit from hearing their stories. And these are just 2 guys down here on the border in the middle of the desert. And so how many more other people are like them out there that have a story to tell that other people could really benefit from hearing? I thought about writing a book then, but then I realized that was going to be way too much work in between firefighting and stuff. So that's when I decided just to put my iPhone down on a dusty cardboard box in front of this casita and had the first conversation with Kyle at like 3 p.m. on a Sunday. And that was my first podcast. And it just kind of took off from there.
So you actually recorded your first podcast with your iPhone?
Yes. Yeah. I started the first like 5 of them, I think, were usually on iPhones. I had no idea what I was doing.
That's awesome.
They were just kind of conversations.
That's such an important lesson though, man, because a lot of people, I know a lot of people who want to like start something and like start a business and I've done this too, start a new project, but they feel they need to get all fancy before you do it. And then they don't ever start, or they waste so much energy, like getting the fancy equipment and getting their logos and getting their business cards and all that stuff, that they never actually, once they're done with that, they're like exhausted and they don't actually do the thing that they wanted to do, And so that's a really admirable trait you have, that you just kind of did it.
Well, kind of. Let me add a little caveat to that before you talk me up too much on that, because I did record the podcast, right? So I did record these, and they're still up. And some people have asked me why I've kept them up. Especially my parents have asked that, and I said, well, that's where I came from. I know they suck, but that's where I started, so I'm going to keep them up. But so I recorded those, Ruben, and pretty much exactly what you just described is exactly what I did for the next year of my life. I thought about what I was going to call it. I thought about what the logo was going to be. I thought about I need to get the website up and running. I thought about every little piece of the party except for actually just publishing the damn thing. And that's when I had this moment that I talk about in the book, where I got on my motorcycle one evening and I rode down to my favorite bar in Rio Rico, Arizona there. It's called the Comeback Y'all Saloon. It is awesome if you ever swing by there. I ordered a Blue Moon with an orange in it, of course. And I ordered another one after that. And it was after my second beer that I was looking at my laptop after it had been a year now since I first recorded the podcast. And I was like, I'm fucking putting this up today, right now, at this moment. I'm not waiting any longer. And so I took one more sip of the beer, of course, and I finally hit publish after a year. I remember kind of like what you're talking about. There were no celebrations. I didn't get a free drink. Nobody called me. Nobody told me congrats. It was just kind of me sitting there in the silence with like the desert air. But I'd finally done it. I'd finally crossed that resistance threshold.
You did it. Yeah, that's the thing. You had the follow through. So it took you a year, but you had the follow through. That's no small feat, because that resistance, man, that'll get you. That gets me a lot still. Like, I'll write something that I think is halfway decent, and I'll keep polishing it up until I think it's a little bit better, and then I can share it with my people, and then I'm like, I actually found this little bit that's actually not quite right, doesn't connect in exactly the way that I wanted to, and so then I'm doing the same thing that I just described. I am continuing to perfect until finally, like 5 days after my original desire to post. Yeah, I'll post it, and you do have to find the line, I think, between, because you could call that perfectionistic for sure, but you do have to find a line between doing work that you're proud of and also just getting it done and getting it out there. So,
I have a question for you real quick on that. Are you talking specifically around your Instagram account?
Yeah, I mean, it could be Instagram, it could be social media, it could be, I share writings on my email list also. I'm writing a book too. And so these kind of things, I've scrapped like literally 50 drafts of a book because it's not exactly my thoughts. And part of that is just a process, but part of that, it's hard to know what part of that is just self-doubt and perfectionism,
Yeah, I guess the Instagram, I was just wondering if it's because you have such a large following that it's almost now the force of the expectations that this massive following has that also adds an extra layer of difficulty or resistance on top of you yourself having it.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a factor. I think that I'm in my private life, I'm very reserved and really private. I'm fairly introverted, and I have relationships with a few people, but that's about it. So it isn't a bit of a shock to have an audience that expects content, and maybe they don't expect content. A lot of it is made up. A lot of it's like it's too self-important. I'm attaching too much self-importance to the whole project. So yeah, I think that there is an element of I need to post because these people are expecting it. And that messes with me a lot, because I found when I attach, like, especially approval, like external approval to what I'm doing, it basically deflates my creativity entirely. So part of my process has been working to detach myself from expectations and outcomes. And you have to too, because of algorithms and things outside of your control that you really are working against. These are all factors that are at play that are working against the natural dynamic between humans. It's like you could share something and it could be great, but it could maybe not get the play that it deserves because of an arbitrary algorithm. And so that's why social media is so odd, because it goes against our natural way of interacting, I would say, in many ways. Mm-hmm. You don't get the feedback, the immediate feedback, the real-time feedback. Anyway, I got off track there, but thank you for that insightful question. Are you interviewing me or am I interviewing you? I forgot.
No, that's good to know, man. Yeah, it's good to hear.
You published a podcast, that was a milestone. I mean, that was a big deal for you, because from then, did you then start publishing more consistently?
Yeah, that was like 5 years ago. That was kind of when podcast was still a little bit more in its infancy. And yeah, that was kind of my side project throughout. I did 3 seasons of Wildland Firefighting, like I mentioned. And in between there, I would travel to South America. I'd always wanted to go and learn Spanish and meet Spanish girls. So I would go down there, and in the winters, and I went to Peru and Guatemala and Colombia and Costa Rica. And through those travels as well, anybody I met that I thought was interesting, that were living life somewhat unconventionally and on their own terms, and had changed a certain aspect of their life and just had an interesting story that I wanted to capture and I wanted other people to hear. We'd sit down. I have sat down literally in the middle of a banana field on a Costa Rican farm. I have sat down in a little shack in Antigua, Guatemala, like next to the cobblestone streets. I've sat down in the beach of like this Colombian town with no electricity, like having a conversation on hammocks, because I just wanted to go around capturing these stories for everyone else to hear. This was while you were in the Wildland Firefighting crew, or was this afterward? Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is so I would do 6 months from April till October. I'd be working nonstop, traveling around the whole country to fires with the crew. And then, from like October until March, you're off. You're 100% off. I had no girlfriend. I had no kids, obviously. And I had no job, right? There's no emails to respond to. There's nothing. Nothing. And I did that 3 winters. Yeah. Was the salary from that job such that it supported travel? Yeah, I had student loans, but yeah, I would take home in like the 5 to 6 months, I would take home somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000. Oh, that's awesome. That's more than enough for some travel, especially if you do it. Yeah, 25 years old with no one to worry about besides me, and taking home 30 to 40 grand in 5 to 6 months of work, all day. That's awesome. And why did you stop? Was it like just a contractual position, or did you just decide to stop because you needed to move on? I mean, I'm a commitment phobe until I met Ashley, of course, my fiance. I also just kind of try and run my life with intuition first and then reasoning second. I do my best, and firefighting had run its course. I'd done it for like I said, that kind of season in AmeriCorps, 3 full seasons in some of the hardest terrain in the country. I got to fly around in helicopters all over the country, go to Alaska, see these grizzly bears, see moose. Like, I just had such an unbelievable experience, and it just ran its course. I was ready for something new. I knew I needed a change. I also didn't want gum cancer from all the Copenhagen I was chewing, or broken knees from hiking up too many mountains. So it was time to make a change. Yeah.
And what was that change? What did you end up? What direction did you end up going at that point?
So that's when I basically was like, well, okay, I've done volunteer work for a year. I have done kind of blue collar work, right? Wildland firefighting is very blue collar. It attracts a very specific type of nomad outdoorsman, which I resonate with entirely. I still am that person. But I also wanted to try my hand at, the business world. And I just wanted to go explore that, new area of the world and new area of life. When I was in AmeriCorps, actually, if you rewind a couple of years, I did that project outside of San Antonio, right? And I knew one friend in Austin, which is about an hour and a half drive. So one weekend I came and visited her. We were about 2 beers in on 6th Street, which is kind of the main street here that has a bunch of live music and bars and stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember looking around and just saying, you know what? Like when I'm ready to move to a city, I'm going to move to Austin. I love it here. So that's what I did. That was like, in 2000, maybe 14. And then come 2017, I had only been to Austin that one night, but that was always like in the back of my mind. So as soon as firefighting was done, that was it. I got a buddy of mine after my last season. I asked him if he wanted to road trip it out here with me and fly back. And I put like 3 boxes in the back of my car and we drove out here I had no job. I had one friend from high school that lived here and I had a credit card.
So that's another example of you kind of following what you describe as intuition over hardcore logic or reasoning to make some of these bigger decisions in life.
Yeah, I think it's both, right? You can't just feel your way to success or feel your way to happiness. And it also doesn't mean that intuition is always going to go somewhere easy. I think sometimes we get confused that, well, I'm following what feels right, that means it should be an easy path on the way to where you're going. But that's actually usually not the case, right? It usually means that you're actually going to encounter a lot of resistance from it. When I first had the idea for the podcast, like I said, it came to me like an epiphany that I have to do this, But then, right, like I said, it took me a year to actually put it out there to the world. So following that intuition, it always leads to the right place. It just might take you there the hard way.
Right. It's uncomfortable sometimes. So the intuition is not always a feel-good feeling. Sometimes it's an uncomfortable feeling, as in the case of you wanting to publish your, getting the feeling that you wanted to publish your podcast. But there was resistance there also, but you knew you needed to do it. In some sense, it's kind of like the conscience, it's kind of like our conscience. Our conscience is kind of maybe like a form of intuition, because our conscience tells us things that we should do, but maybe it's hard to do. Maybe we don't want to do it. Maybe it would be better to do something else. And so that's maybe another form of intuition. I'm just trying to frame it in different ways because it's easy, especially for people who are very rationally minded and very logically minded and very like materialist mentality, to say, oh, well, intuition is like wishy-washy and it's a very squishy concept. Intuition, as Daniel Kahneman describes in Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, it's just cognition. It's another form of cognition, just like any other cognitive function. So, there's something there that at one level that you don't know how you know it at another level, maybe. So that's a really useful thing to know.
And I would say you're right in the sense that it is a little more squishy. It definitely is a little more on the woo-woo and squishy side of things, because you can't quantify it exactly. Yeah. In the same way that, the classic one is like when you get bad vibes from somebody, you get a weird feeling from somebody. I don't know exactly why. The guy just was a fucking weirdo, okay? He was creepy. He was creeping me out. Yeah. I can't tell you exactly why. So like, and it's the same thing with the intuition. I don't know. I know I got to do a podcast. In fact, most of the time when it is something like that, and maybe this is the same for you, like the book, the podcast, these kind of like creative pursuits or these things where you're going to have to put yourself out there. I usually know when I'm doing it right, when the first thought after the thought that tells me what I need to do, the first thing that I think about is, oh, fuck. Because at that point, I know, like, once I get that download of, oh man, you have to do a podcast, you have to write a book, I simultaneously know 2 things. One, it's going to suck, and I'm going to have to go through a bunch of resistance and a bunch of internal battles to now get it out. But if I don't, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And so it's almost kind of it's a lose-lose. It's also kind of a win-win.
It's kind of like that quote, which at this point is a little bit cliche, but it's like doing what scares you and excites you. What is it that excites you and scares you? Well, go do that. And the reason, I think, is for the same reason that you described, which is that the thing that excites you, it pulls you, right? And it's like, it's fun and it feels good, but also the kind of fear part, it kind of keeps you honest. And it's like, well, yeah, is this just a feel-good thing, or is it an actual thing that is something that you need to do for your own personal growth? And those things are generally have some fear attached to them. So I think that balance between excitement and fears is something that is really useful to recognize. I wanted to kind of touch on a story in your book that I'm sure is one of the ones that people tell you they like the most and that talk about the most, partly because it's relatable, partly because it's vulnerable on your end. And also because I think it carries a good insight. And it's the pickle story. So I'm sure people have commented about this before, but I laughed out loud when I read this story in the book. Pickle seeds is what you titled the chapter. Yeah. Can you just briefly kind of tell us that story, that experience you had, and also the purpose for you telling that story and the lesson you're trying to convey there?
For sure. Yeah. And yeah, you're spot on. That is the story that a lot of people bring up to me. There's that one and one other towards the end of the book. For anybody listening too, if you want to hear the first chapter of the book in an audiobook form, or you can read it as well, I put together at rewritethерulesthebook.com. You can download the audiobook version or the actual first chapter of it for free on there.
Nice. Yeah, I don't know if I've said that. Rewrite the Rules is the name of the book. I don't know if I've actually said the title yet. I'll have said it in the introduction, but Rewrite the Rules.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I was visiting my parents for like a couple weeks, and I wanted to grow some vegetables in like the little garden that they had there and get it started for them. I went to the local nursery to get squash and tomatoes and all these different plants. And I really wanted to grow pickles in their garden. So I went up to the gentleman that was working the counter, and I 100% seriously looked him in the eye and asked him where I could find pickle seeds. And this dude's look on his face was like, I think he just thought I was messing with him or something. He was like, sorry, you want what? And I was looking at him like, what do you mean what? I just want to grow some pickles. I would like the pickle seeds. And he was like, sir, you can't grow pickles. You can grow cucumbers, or you could grow zucchini or carrots, and you can pickle those things, but pickles aren't an actual vegetable. Things get pickled. And I stood there like, I think I was quiet for at least 5 seconds. I didn't know if he was lying to me or if he was joking with me or if I had made this entire assumption in my mind. And so I just kind of did that awkward thing where you just like turn slowly and kind of glance back at the person and you're like, okay, and just kind of walk away. And I went home and told my parents, and they were like, what are you talking about? Pickles are not a vegetable. So it's like, it's a funny story. Yeah. And I put it at the beginning of the book because, I'll get to the insights, but like I put it at the beginning of the book because any type of self-development or self-help book like this, which I know you enjoy, I enjoy, the last thing I wanted was it to come across as preachy or to come across on like a high horse, and that I'm somebody that is like, follow me into the sunset. And so I thought the best way to like completely dismantle any concept of me being better than anybody else was to tell that story of me being a complete idiot and thinking that pickles were a vegetable. I'm 25 at this time, by the way. I'm not like a young kid. But anyway, so the main component of the seed within the pickle seed story is that this was it's a funny, but it's a very trivial thing for me to have stuck in my mind, right? It's a very trivial seed to be in there that is something that I took as reality, but was completely false about the world at large. Not even about me, but just about the world. I thought pickle seeds were a vegetable. They are not a vegetable. That really didn't impact my life all that much, except for I looked like a fool in front of Joe at the nursery. However, using that as a portal, that's what made me realize, well, hold on a second. If this is a very minor thing that I thought was real this entire time and is clearly not, what other more nefarious things am I holding on to about myself that I thought were true and are not, right? Why do I think I'm not good with money? Why do I think I don't want commitment, with women? Why do I feel like I'm insecure? All these different things that you kind of compartmentalize, and then it's a story to yourself, and then you start to embody that story through your actions that then get cemented in through your identity. Those were now the type of things that I wanted to uncover. I wanted to root out all of these pickle seeds, so to speak, that were still stuck in my mind and growing into plants.
Yeah, that's really, really it's a great way to frame it. And it's a great metaphor, because what you're saying is we have all these assumptions, not just about ourselves, but also, which I'm sure you would agree, about the world, outside of us, that we just, we know them to be true. And it's hard to say how many of those assumptions about ourselves and the world are actually working against us. And the way I think about it is that, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, but we all have those assumptions and beliefs, both about ourselves and about how the world works, And in some sense, those are all necessary. Like we can't, kind of back to the point of intuition, like there are certain things that we just kind of intuit about the world, or the patterns that we recognize and things that we have to assume in order to act in the world, in order to act at all. And so we need kind of those beliefs, and we need that structure in order to act and to do things and to live our lives. We need assumptions about the world, but it's also the case that because sometimes we think there are pickle seeds, because sometimes we have these false assumptions, that structure always needs to be updated, right? And so we always need to kind of question what it is that we're assuming about ourselves and about the world, and constantly update that structure so that we can act in more and more effective ways in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, upgrade the software, right? Like it is really kind of I hate to be the one that's like, comparing the human brain to computers, like, like some people do, but it really is like a really good metaphor that, like, if I look at an iPhone from 8 years ago, I still have an iPhone in my hand. I'm not on the quest to really change myself. I'm just on a quest to improve what I already have. And I think that's a big change. And it's something that was a very strong yes. I hit a point with you. That's good.
Well, you know what? I did, because this, like I said, I'm writing about all of these kind of concepts, and I'm trying to put it all together for my own book. But I think you just said something that was really profound, which is that you're not trying to change yourself completely. You're trying to improve what you already have, or something like that. And that's a distinction, because changing yourself completely is a different thing than improving what you already have. Improving what you already have, I think, that's something like evolution. That's actually what evolution does. Evolution is kind of a conservative force in the sense that it preserves what already is there, like whatever structure the organism has, and then it improves upon that. It doesn't like remake the entire organism from scratch every time, right? And so we can take a lesson from that, and that's what you're pointing to, is like, maybe it's not a revolution that we need. Maybe it's just some minor changes that we make on top of the structure that's already working.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think like through improving, things obviously will change, right? But I think by putting the emphasis on the change, and I was guilty of this in my younger years for sure, and still sometimes, but the more emphasis that we're putting on change, the more it's coming from you're harming yourself, or you're coming out from a negative space, right? Because you're not happy with who you are, and you want to change it so desperately. And so it's like this self-vindictive space that you're an energy that you're coming at it from. However, improvement is now coming at a place of acceptance, and you're accepting who you are, and also recognizing the fact that you're a work in progress and that you can improve on it. which will lead to the change that you might want anyway. And I think that's the big cognitive difference and like the energetic difference between focusing too much on wanting to change yourself versus just get a little better today.
Yes. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, I think that, and the two different sides of the coin are basically kind of desire for something better, and then gratitude for what is, and those are always, you can think of them as conflicting desires because they're kind of opposing, but they also need to work in conjunction with each other. So they're actually two sides of the same coin. I people ask me that, well, how do I balance these two life philosophies? Like, so this person says this, like, be grateful, Eckhart Tolle, I'm reading Eckhart Tolle and it says be grateful. And then over here, I'm reading like, I don't know, Tony Robbins, and he says like, strive for what you want. And it's like, well, yeah, those are both are necessary. You actually need to balance both. And that's kind of the idea, I think.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's kind of like there was a part where I talked about the thoughts, like how everyone says you are your thoughts. You need to control your thoughts.
Yes.
You need to watch your thoughts. And then other people say you are not your thoughts at all. You don't be attached to your thoughts because you aren't your thoughts. You're an eternal being. And I'm always reading these two sides being like, well, what the fuck? What which one is it?
Right. That was a really insightful distinction you made, actually, because those are kind of like two strains of personal development thought, especially when we're talking about like, what are our thoughts? You say that there are two strains of thinking. It's like one strain says that you're not your thoughts. And then the other strain of thinking says, oh, your thoughts make your life. And your insight was that, well, actually both are true.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of, it's just like what you were talking about with improvement and change. And I always come back to like Buddha has, and like Zen Buddhism, it always talks about the middle path, right? And there's this middle ground to everything. And I always come back to that whenever I come to any type of cognitive or like philosophical conundrum like that. I just go, you know what? I think he had it right where he talks about the middle path, the middle. It's both. Yep. It's not one or the other. And usually I think when people are pushing really hard on one, it's because they have already doubled down on that opinion in their personal or professional life. And a lot of their brand or a lot of their ideology or a lot of the person that they have built up over years or decades has always said a certain thing. And to go against that at this point would be, identity suicide. So I think a lot of them, once they decide on that path, they just keep on going on that path without even acknowledging the fact that there's like this whole other potential to the thought process like that.
Yes, I completely agree. And that, again, I think we could frame it in the same kind of terms. And those are in terms of like kind of the things we need for stability and the things we need for change. Those are always operating in tension with each other. And when the person who's kind of built an identity on a particular ethic, let's say, we need that identity. Again, we need that foundation from which to view the world and to talk about things. But if you don't update it, if it's not continually updated, then it can get stale and then it can become very, very wrong, especially as new information comes at you. And I think that's what you're describing, people failing to update that belief structure and that worldview in a sense.
Definitely, man. I'm excited to read your book. It's going to be good.
I hope so, man. Thank you. I'm not trying to impose my framework on here, but I think you intuitively understand the thing that I'm trying to articulate, and we all do to a degree. It's just that I think sometimes the culture, sometimes social media, which obviously is part of the culture, environmental factors can make us question ourselves, make us question the things that we already know deep down in some ways. So I like your book, man, because it's, like I said, it's authentic, it's very real, but it's also vulnerable in many ways. You're not trying to be something like a photoshopped version of something. You're saying your truth, and you're saying exactly what it is that has happened in your life without the glamour. It's also funny, but it's also very practical. Like, there's also a lot of practical things that I took from it. And one of those is conveyed in a story about the first time you cut down a tree, or the first time you tried to cut down a tree in your wildlife firefighting days. Can you just briefly kind of go over that story and just tell us that little anecdote there? Because I thought that was a really profound moment there after your boss kind of talked to you.
Yeah, yeah. And first of all, I really appreciate coming from you, seriously, who reads a ton to get those kind of compliments on my book. It really does, like, it means a lot, and it makes me motivated to like keep getting the book out to more people, because sometimes you doubt what you creatively put out. So I appreciate that. And so, yeah, with that anecdote was centered around me in about 2 feet of snow deep in the mountains of Colorado in my first firefighting season, with a captain that looks exactly like how you would picture a wildland firefighting captain to look like. Foot long beard, Copenhagen constantly in his mouth, ball cap. He's 55 years old, just a grizzled man that I was, fairly intimidated by. Also a sweetheart, by the way. His name is Russ. But I went to go cut down this tree. And the way you cut down a tree is you cut out like a little pie cut on one side, and then on the other side, you make like a horizontal cut, and it hopefully goes in the direction that you want. So I'm there and I'm cutting down this massive pine tree. It's probably 80 feet tall. It's fucking huge. I start cutting the pie out and everything goes pretty well. And then I start making the horizontal cut on the back. And now the one thing you don't want to have happen when you're cutting a tree is you usually don't want to cut down the trees that are straight up and down, because those are the hardest to know where they're going to go, right? They have a little lean to them. You're almost 100% confident it's going to go that direction. This one was straight up and down. It was a little bit breezy. It was snowing, and it was huge. So I start making this horizontal cut, and it's not moving. And so I keep going more and more and more. I'm looking up. The snow keeps falling, and I'm just like, why is this thing not going the way I want it to? So I look up for the third time, and the slight wind, it picks up at this point, and it actually pushes the entire tree and the entire 50,000 pounds onto the chainsaw. So now the chainsaw is stuck in the tree. The one tool I had to cut down the tree is now stuck inside of it, and there's no way of getting it out. And the tree is at this point 90% cut through. So it could fall down at any minute and kill me or kill my captain that's there watching me do it. So luckily, he hands me his chainsaw. I now have to do the exact same thing on the other side, the side that the wind is now pushing the tree. So now I'm cutting another pie cut, another horizontal cut into this tree that's almost already down. I finally get the thing down. It comes crashing down with a big old sound. I was shook, like literally, no pun intended. I was shook from that. We kind of stopped and went and got lunch in the trucks. And I didn't want to do chainsawing anymore, especially that day. I was kind of shaken up from that. I really wanted to quit that day, like maybe even quit chainsawing in general, but I definitely wanted to quit in that moment. So we finish our sandwiches and stuff, and the captain comes and grabs me when we're going to go start our next assignment. And he's like, Starr, come with me. And I'm like, oh God, no. And so he walks me over, and he takes me to a tree that's probably about 50% bigger than the one that I had just messed up on. And he looks at me with his giant beard and spits some Copenhagen out of his mouth. And he's like, you're going to cut down this tree next. And if he hadn't have made me, there's no way I would have, but I didn't want to look like the pansy in the situation or say no to him. So I went and I cut the tree, and I came at it with such a resistant force, with such like a nervous and scared energy to it. And somehow through the act of like starting the chainsaw again, and the minute that the blade touched the wood, it evaporated. That feeling evaporated. And it got replaced with this like conviction that I was going to cut down this next tree the way that it was meant to be cut down. And that's the way it was going to go. And there's nothing anybody could tell me otherwise. And I had such focus. And I cut that tree down, and it went the direction that I wanted it to go. It was a clean cut, and it fell perfectly. He did nothing. He just sat there. He nodded. He said, nice. And he stomped off through the snow back to the truck. But for me, it was like a massive pivotal moment. I had somebody else that made me go back out and get back on the horse, so to speak, fire up the chainsaw, so to speak, after everything in my mind and body was telling me to not do it again, that I was going to kill somebody. I was going to kill myself emotionally, and I was maybe going to kill myself physically. And he made me do it. And to see the outcome of that was like a pivotal moment in my life that, even when that happens, it sounds cliche, but that you have to try again at least one more time, and to prove to yourself that you can do it.
So I think that there's probably two, maybe more lessons in this story, but one of and obviously the perseverance lesson, I think is an obvious one. The other one that you mentioned in the book that I thought was really, really useful and very psychologically accurate was that I'm just gonna read this passage really quickly because it's just a couple sentences, but you put it really well. You said, if I had packed up my chainsaw that day, I would have fed the anxiety and nerves in my mind. My actions would have said, you're right to be scared. You stepped beyond your competence level, and look where it got you. Never again. And that's the message that your brain would have received and would have kind of solidified. And that's true whenever we're facing anything scary or anything that affects us negatively or anything challenging, right? Like I think what you were saying is that if we turn away from that, we teach our brains how to respond to that in that same manner. And that's actually what they talk about in acceptance and commitment therapy. This is a idea called psychological flexibility, and you explained it perfectly. It's like you teach your brain how to respond to situations, and in that moment, I think you taught your brain that, oh, actually, when something is scary or challenging, I face it, and that's the thing that I go do, and that's a huge shift, and that's a massive rewiring of your brain.
Yeah, and and building that habit, I think, is so crucial, right? As well, that in those moments, you are the type of person that responds and takes action again, even though you don't want to. And then you almost don't have to try as hard to do it, because your brain automatically then wants to reinforce that identity to yourself, good or bad. You're somebody who eats cheeseburgers all the time, then you're somebody who always goes to the restaurant and orders a cheeseburger. If you're somebody that always acts even though you're scared again after a failure, then your identity is going to want to continue to do that.
Yes, I completely agree. Is this something that you've that you practice in your daily life? Obviously, this was like kind of a big event, this was a massive, like the tree was a actual life or death situation, but do you practice this on a smaller scale, like in your own life in various ways?
I probably should more, but I think some of the ways that cognitively that I do it is by and I guess I'm just kind of realizing this now as you ask that question, is that I usually am trying to constantly challenge myself to do something new, and then inherently in that is going to be fuck ups. I have done a couple of half Ironmans. I'm doing Muay Thai now. I just try and do pursuits, especially physical ones, or even writing the book was a huge one, right? Because it might have completely flopped on its head. So I think inherently in taking that decisive action to I'm going to go try this new big thing, then of course I'm going to screw some stuff up along the way. But if I committed and I told people that I was going to do it, then that means I am going to have to move past it and keep going.
Yeah, I think that's an ethic that you embody a lot, because even earlier in the conversation, you said, I get an intuition to do something, but then I know it's a really good intuition if my second thought is, oh, fuck. And so that's kind of that idea that oh, damn, but you do it anyway. And that's the whole thing, is you're training your brain to kind of do the things that are difficult and that may not come naturally to you. But anyway, I know we're coming up in time. I know you have to go shortly, but I wanted to just kind of give you a chance I want to ask you a question, give you a chance to expound on it however you wanted to. What is the main takeaway that you, if there is one, maybe there's more than one, but maybe if you could give us the main takeaway that you want people to get from your book, the overarching message that you want to impart to the readers of this book and to anyone who kind of, interacts with you? What is that? What would that be?
It's a great question, and it's something I've been trying to refine for a long time. But at the core of it is that society and the world is going to put you in a box. And so don't do it to yourself as well. Don't put yourself in a box when there's going to be so many outside forces that are going to be happy to do it for you. There are so many ways to live life, and we happen to be in this very small sliver of time in all of humanity. And the way things are being done right now, it doesn't mean it's the right way to do them for the world or for yourself. And I want people, when they put down this book, there's two things I want them to do. One, I want them to have a couple moments during the book where they had the pickle seed moment where they go, oh, it's not just me. Like I'm not the only one who's made a dumb mistake like that. That's a really powerful moment for people to have. I'm not the only one. That's a powerful moment that we love hearing that from other people. And then I also want them to have that window cracked open a bit. I want that box to be broken through a little bit. I want them to go, I never realized I could go travel and do it like that. I could do that type of a job. Maybe I could, do this with my life. I could move there, opening up the doors of perception to what is actually possible with this one life that we have, not dependent on who you are, where you grew up, and the way that your parents were, and that you have control over where it ends up is what I want people to come to the conclusion of when they put down the book.
That's awesome, man. I think that's really well put. And I think you do a good job of conveying that message in the book. So again, Rewrite the Rules is the book. Subtitle, An Unconventional Way to Build an Intentional Life. I love it, man. I think you did a great job. I'm really proud of you. And you're motivating me to get on the horse and get my book done too. So,
dude, I appreciate you, Ruben, man. It's honestly been so much fun being internet friends with you, and then being real life friends with you, and then now kind of us converging creatively, with these different projects and stuff. It's just been fun, man. So I appreciate you.
Hey, thanks for listening. You can find the show notes for this episode and all other episodes on my website at thinkgrowprosper.com/podcast. That's where I put all the links and resources mentioned in each episode. It's also where I put the outlines of topics covered, which is a really good way to refer back to episodes in the future. Lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to leave a review on iTunes with your biggest takeaway. I make it a point to read all the reviews. You can also screenshot this episode and share it to your social media along with something you learned or found interesting. And tag me in your post because I'd love to see what you found interesting. Say hi and thank you for your support.